All right, and we are live yet again with Kameel Vohra. Kameel, thank you for joining us. This has been a long time coming too. There's so many things I want to talk to you about. Neurodiversity, writing your own book, some of the creative, innovative things that you're doing at Dell. I'm just thrilled to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Sabrina. Actually, I've really been looking forward to spending some more time chatting to you. So this is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we get stuck in these conversations that are, every time, even last time, I'm like, wait, you did that too? That too? So I appreciate you sharing some of this with the audience because it's pretty unique. And I think it's really empowering and inspiring. And it's based on data, which is my favorite thing. So let's dive in. For some of the, few folks who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess maybe an easy place to start is what I currently do. So right now I work for Dell. I'm head of the global peripheral software division, which is all fun and games. It's about innovation and how do we make a mouse more than a mouse? How do we make a display more than a display? But that's sort of what I would say what I do by day. By night, I'm sort of really a diversity advocate. It's what I spend most of my time doing when I'm not working, and that's everything from writing the books to teaching children, teaching parents, just spreading the message and saying, here's what we need to be doing more broadly to help push and promote everything that sort of comes under that big bracket of diversity, or DEI. But I wasn't always a corporate man. So before I joined Dell, I've had my fair share of fun running my own businesses and doing different things. Um, I used to be in sort of banking, designing the future of retail banking. What does it look like in 5 years? I used to actually run my own hotel, which was a crazy experience. I think everybody should do it at least once.
No, thanks.
Yeah, the only business I've ever been in where I've literally said after working sort of almost a week nonstop to the manager and just went, don't call me unless the building's on fire. Got home, sat down, poured myself a glass of whiskey, only to have my phone ring. And he goes, so I'm really sorry, but the lobby's on fire. I'm like, oh my god.
No.
Yeah, I'm joking. But yeah, no, so some really, really crazy fun things in the past. But all of that sort of led me here. And now here I am doing software for Dell and advocating for diversity and inclusion in my spare time.
I think that's an important point that, some folks who maybe have left IT or left an industry or thinking about getting into, and they think, well, I don't have the right skills, or, I used to own a hotel that was on fire, or, I just don't quite, maybe not. I think that's a unique to Camille type situation. But I think it's important to acknowledge that not everyone comes with this highly technical background, that piece, that's diversity of thought and experiences and where you've lived and the people you've interacted with, the problems you've solved. So that wasn't even a point of what I wanted to talk about, and here you are already teaching more lessons. So I'm so
I
glad
think
that you said that.
Yeah, no, and honestly speaking, when I came into Dell, when I came into this role and sort of was really tasked with, hey, give us something new. Um, I think one of the reasons why I really enjoyed it is it's been good being able to bring people from non-traditional backgrounds in, and it really does bring very very different thinking. And when we talk about how do we create innovation or how do we really do things differently, we hear a lot of these buzz terms like, oh, you need to have diversity, you need to have different people sitting around you. The reality is when you've got people who have got hospitality backgrounds, or you've got people who have got backgrounds from auto parts or electronics or from all sorts of different things, and you sit them in a room and you say, hey, here's a problem, every single one of them looks at that problem completely differently. Whereas if you've got all the people who've sort of come in from the same organization, or just broadly speaking from the same background, you get very very boring, very straight and narrow answers. So there's a lot to be said for it. And
Yeah.
on my team, I actively look for people with slightly more eclectic backgrounds to make sure that we get some really crazy stuff going.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I remember getting into IT. I was an attorney at the time, and prior to that was a behavioral therapist. You know, I analyzed behavior for a living. And a couple of folks were like, "What are you doing in IT? You know, what do you?" And I was wondering the same thing. So again, I think the more you can approach problems differently, understand how to use resources differently, even understand what resources are available, it produces a better outcome. And that's ultimately what we're looking for is how do we innovate? And you can't innovate doing the same things, which is one of
Exactly.
the reasons, one of the reasons that I'm so inspired and excited to talk with you. You know, you are kind of known for innovation, not just around Dell, but in the industry. And you're actually working on some cool stuff right now. So I guess it might be hard to pick, but is there something, that you're really proud of, or anything, a project that you've been working on, or anything that you want to kind of tell us about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much. So a lot of what we deal with, I can't really talk about because that's stuff that's coming out. But I can certainly tell you some of the cool stuff that we've done recently. So we've made a couple of really big changes to the way our peripherals work. And one of the things that we've done is we were looking at how people connect their mice, their keyboards, their headsets to their computers, and that's something that really hasn't changed in the last 20 years. You have to go through this horrific mechanism of find the Bluetooth thing and then click two things and then find the device, and you're sitting around which one's mine, and there's like 20 other things that your computer finds, and you're like, oh my god, all I want to do is pair this mouse with this headset. So we completely reinvented that, and we just said, you know what, move your headset, move your keyboard, move your mouse, just move it near your computer, and your computer's going to go, bing, hey, listen, I found the headset, is this yours? And you click yes, and that's it, it's done, and it just starts working. We call it Dell Pair, and it is probably one of the sexiest things that I've seen recently happen to computers. So it's really sort of modernized the whole how do we connect your device thing? How do we get it down to just one click, and your grandma can do this. That was probably one of the best things, or one of the most fun projects that I've worked on recently.
Very neat. I could unpack just that. I could spend 20 minutes just on understanding, well, what were the dynamics? What kind of resources did you leverage? How did you think outside the box on that one? So maybe let's just kind of dip our toe in there, because I do want to talk about your book as well, which has an unbelievable sort of data backed component to it that I just think is so neat and really relates and transfers into the IT space as well. So before
Yeah.
we get into that, I do want to know, maybe tell us a little bit about your process, or kind of how did you start to think outside the box?
So I think one of the interesting things about a lot of companies, or a lot of teams rather, is we tend to, when we talk about innovation or when we talk about next generation, we take a very step by step, or iterative approach to being able to do things, and that is where we tend to ignore typically this concept of end-to-end user journey, right? Or what's actually going on. And what we did was we really just sort of took a step back and said, if you look at what your user's doing, what's actually happening, how do they go through this, and just sit down and quietly observe, and you'll see what's going on, and that lets you sort of very quickly identify things that people take for granted, or people just sort of say, nope, I've got to do this, and this, and you're looking at it and you're going, well, what if we could cut 20 steps out of that, or what if we could do that a little bit simpler? Is that a pain point worth solving? And as you start cutting away, or as you start sort of looking at the whole journey, the sort of holistic user journey, that's where you start to realize that this is the problem in the experience. So it's not a mouse problem, it's not a keyboard problem, it's not a headset problem, it's a user problem. And that's where, in my opinion, real innovation starts to happen. It's about how do you add value, or how do you improve a user outcome, and that's something that you can apply to basically anything. It's not specific to any given product. It could literally be, how do we improve accessibility for a building, right? How do we improve outcomes, or user outcomes, when going into a train station? I went to a train station today, and as I grabbed the handrail to walk up the steps, quite a long long flight of steps, I realized that there was actually a braille inset on the handrail. And I sort of rubbed my fingers over it, and I was like, okay, this is actually telling me go to platform A, right? Or these stairs go to platform A. And I just thought, that's fantastic. That is so well thought out, right? That is somebody sitting down saying, how do I improve an end user outcome just with small things? And when you as somebody who's visually impaired, when you turn up and you go, wait a minute, this is really easy, that's huge. That's a phenomenal benefit to end user outcomes. So I would say, if you have to think about innovation, if you've got to think about how we're going to do something new or unique, don't focus on can we get more patents in there, right? Think about it from a perspective of how do we just improve the end outcome for a user, and that's really what's going to get you from sitting down looking at a piece of plastic and turning it into something that users are really going to enjoy.
And this, you said something that will stick with me forever, and I hope everyone caught it. You have to put yourself in their shoes. And I would imagine as they were building that handrail, they were talking to some visually impaired people saying, what would help? So that you can really put yourself into their shoes and then understand, how do I make this better? It's really less about you, it's more about them. And when you do that, when you kind of come at almost like a service mindset or servant's mindset, and go, how do I make this better for you? Take me out of the equation for a second. I think all of a sudden, then you start to really change how your brain is thinking. I'm sure there's a ton of neuroscience going on behind the scenes of really allowing yourself to think bigger, to think differently. And then again, you're leveraging all these different resources, different minds, different experiences. That's very cool. That is very cool.
Yeah,
I could dive in more. What's that?
No, I was going to say you hit it right on the head. That's exactly it. How do you put yourself in somebody else's shoes? And how do you look at that? It sounds easy. I'll tell you what. It takes some effort. It takes a little bit of practice to be able to sit down and go, okay, it's not all about me, right? There are other people here.
Right.
We were going to think about them. Yeah. So it's but it results in really good things when you can finally do it.
And I struggle with how do you do that? Because that sounds really nice and lovey-dovey, but we also are in business. How do we make money? And I think the two are actually tied together. I think when you step away from yourself and make the experience better for the people that you're serving, you will make more money. The business will see an ROI. I think that's the connection that a lot of times can get lost and feel like it's almost two sides of completely different coins. And it's like, actually, it's two sides of the same coin,
No,
at least in my experience.
absolutely. I'll tell you what, any business at the end of the day, it is about its customers, right? So it's that whole thing of play nice and win. Richard Branson sort of really has this down, and sort of his whole concept is, we are in service to our customers, and the better we take care of them, the better they will take care of us. So
Right.
we do have to look at our customers. We really do have to think about them. We have to think for them and sort of say, well, what do they care about, right? If this is what they care about, then that's what we've got to do. We have to. That's why we're here. We're here to serve.
Right, right. I think it's I think it's starting to shift and maybe become a little bit more mainstream. Maybe that's me being a little Pollyanna and hoping it is, but I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree more with that. So, knowing that we only have a few minutes left, I do want to dive into you've written a couple books. So I do want to kind of understand the overview, but you just recently, for your newest book, did a really neat study that I was hoping you could help at least kind of dip our toe in, give us a little
Oh,
bit of
absolutely.
insight about what
I'd
you're
love
doing.
to talk about it. There's no question. There's no secret there. Yeah. So this will be book number 4. I'm really looking forward to it. The first 3 were very much aimed at younger children, right? So they were really sort of, hey, 3 to 8, how do we introduce concepts of diversity? How do we introduce concepts of inclusion? And how do we talk about things like disabilities? And they were really well received. I spent a lot of time talking to teachers and a lot of time talking to educators about how we can bring some of these concepts in. And we got phenomenal feedback from them about how they can create and stimulate discussions in class. And when I was looking at doing my 4th book, I wanted to take a slightly different tack. What I discovered in my first 3 is that even young children can have incredibly deep conversations, very adult-like conversations about some of these concepts. So I said, well, I'd really like to look at what can slightly older children do. So let's have a look at the 8 to 13-year-old bracket, and try to understand what do they think, and how do they really work. And the focus of that book was about imagination, right? What do children 8 to 13, having just gone through a pandemic, think the world is going to look like in 100 years, right? So, and I went out to literally hundreds of schools all over the world, and I spent a year surveying thousands of children. I got them to fill out forms, write, well, not forms, but fill out sort of worksheets and draw pictures, and said, however you want, you tell me what it's going to look like. And I gave them categories. I said, what do you think sports is going to look like? What do you think food's going to look like? What's TV going to look like? You pick it. You work on it and come back. And I got just this phenomenal volume of feedback. The schools turned it into these really cool class projects and whatnot. Hundreds of entries coming in from all over the shop. And whilst that was going on, I started to go out to different industry leaders. So I, went to heads of sports companies, right, SVP innovation in lots of different companies, and I said, hey, I've got all this information coming in from these kids, and some of it's really, really interesting. What do you think the future is going to look like? Mr. SVP of innovation for premium brand of sneakers, for travel, for all sorts of different things. And what was really curious, as those interviews started to conclude, and as I started to get that information back, when I was looking at it, 2 or 3 things really started to stand out. The first one was that, one, it doesn't matter where these kids were in the world, barring like marginal regional differences, they really do think the same way. So all these kids are sitting there going, yeah, the future of sports is going to look like this, right? Or the future of travel is going to look like this. And I was like, wow, right? That's just incredible, right? There's these kids with really different backgrounds, completely different places, and when you just give them free rein for their imagination, they're like, yeah, absolutely, this is what it's going to be like. And it's so similar, just so similar in terms of what they were thinking. What got really fun was when you took that and you sort of compared it to what these heads of industry were thinking, and you sort of look at it and you go, well, wait a minute, it's pretty much the same thing. Not really too much difference here. It was incredible. I mean, okay, yeah, a little bit more refined because 4 or 5 decades of experience, but by and large, the direction was really similar, and I was just blown away, going, I can't believe that the head of a couple of sports companies is really thinking that nope, the future of sports is this, and that a lot of the kids were by and large like, yeah, it's pretty accurate. That's what we think is going to happen. That's what we want to happen. That's the future that we envisage for ourselves. I was like, wow, right? Either there's some serious serendipity going on there, or it's interesting to see how it doesn't matter where you come from or what your background is. That we're all dreaming about the same things. We've all got the same desires and the same sort of end goals for what we want the world to look like, which was pretty incredible. I mean,
That is so cool. Yeah.
Well, obviously wanted to really sort of edge cases, right? I had 1 or 2 kids turn up with some of the darkest things you've ever seen. I was like, oh my god, a little bit too much post-apocalypse going on here. But barring that, yeah, it was pretty incredible. So that's a book that I'm hoping to finish by middle of the year. So I'm really trying to cram some extra time into my weekends to get that one out. But it should be really good. Just a really good fun read.
I love that you've polled so many people and across a pretty broad age and spectrum and experiences. I think getting that level of detail and data is so telling. And then to your point, to get these kinds of insights that are really revealing. And so do you have a sense, I don't want to spoil anything. We'll definitely make sure people know where to find your book, but do you have a sense of how you're going to use this data to, what direction the book's going to take?
So at the moment, it's there's a couple of interesting things going on. So as I have a look at the way things are laid out, I think what I'm going to be doing, the way we're going to be presenting it, is really having a look at different categories and just vision the future for different spaces. And we're going to be having a look at what do the children think, what do the professionals think, what does imagination or what does imagination and innovation look like for any given space or any given industry, and how do we see it evolving. So in terms of where it's going to go or what sort of insights we're going to be driving from it, one of the key points I'm going to be putting across to the children is one, hey, keep dreaming, keep thinking big. The ideas that you have are the same things that really senior people with loads of experience is the same type of thought process that they've got. So that imagination, that creativity, all of those great ideas, don't stop dreaming, right? That's really going to be a key message that I want to take across as we show them how their concepts are the same thing, those same fundamentals that are really driving some of the key players in the industry. But the other big thing that I'm really going to be driving towards, which was very nice as an outcome, I must confess it was not an intended outcome, but the other big thing was really just illustrating how children from different places think, and what they're dreaming about, and how there's so much similarity, yet with cultural difference. And you can see that it's very clear that there's that sort of, okay, it's the same sort of thing, but just from a slightly different aspect. And that whole concept of we're different, but we're really kind of the same, is another big piece I'm going to be driving to as we get into it. So those are going to be my two main themes. One about, hey, keep dreaming. This is where you're going, and we'll see in 100 years where you're at. So hopefully somebody in 100 years will pick up this book and go like, this is what they thought of the future. That's so crazy.
Of course we'll have flying cars, right? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'll tell you what's really funny, Sabrina. When I was doing the research for this book, I looked at some newspaper clippings from about 100 years ago and what they thought the future would be like. And they thought we'd have flying trains. So, it's not too different.
Not quite what we expected, right? Is there any outliers, like really creative or really innovative, where you go, there were some similarities with those maybe outside the bell curve? We've got sort of your standard deviation, but any outliers that you go, you know what, there's a lesson here, or there's something we could glean from these folks that maybe these kids, these, senior, super senior leaders. Is there any overlap in the outliers that you go, that's interesting?
So, I mean, in terms of the outliers, I think the one of the things that sort of came up repeatedly was environmental damage and environmental consequences. That was really curious, and we saw kids really take this in different capacities, right? In terms of, oh, hey, we're not going to have food left, so we're going to have to eat pills, or through to there'll be no food left, so we're going to have to just move to the moon. So in different ways, they were all touching on this. Hey, we're headed towards environmental catastrophe. We really need to do something. And that was curious to see how many different children were really thinking about this, and not in a negative way, more in terms of if there's a catastrophe, we better go away and do this, right? We're going to live underground. We're going to move under the sea. We're going to move to the moon. It was all something, but the genesis of it was, there's some real trouble coming, and maybe we're not being good enough about it. So that was curious. But when you have a look at how that sort of played out with a lot of the industry professionals, what was interesting to see was, one, nobody mentioned it, but two, many of the corporate policies, or many of the sort of environmental policies that you see today, I can see why some of the kids are concerned, because they're a little bit superficial. Yeah, maybe they need to go a little further. And it's interesting to see that this generation is so concerned about it, and they're so they take it so seriously. They have this view that we're not treating the planet as well as we need to for their future. I would say that's in terms of an outlier. It was one of those things that sort of reoccurred, not with a high frequency, but with enough for us to be able to say, I guess that's interesting, and with relatively varying degrees of dark through to very positive. But yeah.
The behavioralist in me, I'm like, I want to know everything. That is very fascinating, though, especially that sustainability is such a big topic in the IT industry and kind of across, globally, but for very different reasons. So, that's very interesting.
It does. No, I mean, as Dell, we've got these 2030 goals, and we're constantly talking about like how we're going to achieve this, how we're going to do that, how we get more recycled plastic in. And I think the question it really begs is, are we doing enough? Not just as a company, but as as a hesitate to use the word species, but as a collective, are we doing enough to take care of the one planet that we have? You know, so it's always an interesting piece to put out there.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we could spend another 20 minutes on that alone. Yes. So I know we're already over, and I do this every time, but I'm just so fascinated by your work and the way you think and create solutions to problems, and even the way you approach problems. So there's just so much to learn from you. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us and kind of helping us dive into some of this information, and again, how you approach things. For those who don't know you and want to find you or find your book, is there a place they can go? How do people get in touch with you?
Oh, absolutely. So my website is KameelVohra.com. So
Okay.
feel free to jump on there. You can find me quite easily. But for my books, Amazon.com, they're sort of all on there. Just type in my name and they'll hopefully come up. Please buy some books. Work with mine.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much. And I can't wait to have you back on. And for all the amazing work that you're doing, I cannot stress enough for folks to check out your books. That's actually one of the ways we met, was through one of your books. So thank you for what you're doing and inspiring, and the way you're building teams. It's quite amazing. And I think the results speak for themselves.
Thank you so much for having me, Sabrina. I really appreciate it. It was lovely to talk. Take care.
See you soon. Bye.
Cheers.